Okay, if people could take their seats. I'm going to give the introduction to Professor Loidolt. Professor Sophie Loidolt is currently professor of philosophy and holds the chair of practical philosophy at TU Darmstadt. Her work centers on issues in the fields of phenomenology, political and legal philosophy, and ethics, as well as transcendental philosophy and philosophy of mind. She also has a strong interest in feminist philosophy and gender studies. Her last book from 2018, paperback 2020, was awarded the Edward Gooden Ballard Book Prize and investigates the philosophy of Hannah Arendt, which she conceives mainly as a phenomenology of plurality. That book is entitled Phenomenology of Plurality, Hannah Arendt on Political Intersubjectivity from Routledge. She's published two other books, Einführung in die Rechtsphänomenologie, eine historische systematische Darstellung, from Moore Siebeck in 2010, and Anspruch und Rechtfertigung, eine Theorie des rechtlichen Denkens in Anschluss an die Phänomenologie de Edmund Husserls from Springer 2009. Currently, she is working on a book on public experiences, on being, appearing, and acting in public, which develops a phenomenological theory of the public realm. Before coming to Darmstadt, she worked as a visiting professor at the philosophy department at the University of Kassel and was an assistant professor at the University of Vienna, where she also, most of her education took place. She has been present at the New School for Social Research in New York, St. Denis University in Paris, the Husserl Archives in Leuven, and the Center for Subjectivity Research in Copenhagen. Her current cooperations continue with the Center for Subjectivity Research in Copenhagen, where she is a recurrent visiting professor affiliated with the ERC project, Who Are We? Self-Identity, Social Cognition, and Collective Intentionality. Furthermore, she is the current president of the German Society of Phenomenological Research and the co-editor of the book series Phenomenology at the publishing house Alber Nomos. She has 91 articles published, which if I begin to go through those, we'll be here all night. So I introduced Professor Sophie Loidolt as our keynote speaker.
Thank you so much, Michael. Can you hear me well? Okay, just let me know if anything is going bad with the sound. It is a great honor to give one of this year's keynotes at the 7th conference of the International Alfred Schütz Circle here in Vienna, Schütz's hometown, which is still my hometown too. To commemorate thinkers means to think along with them or to consult their work for our own burning questions. This is what I aim to do this evening. The questions that occupies me, and it has been mentioned a bit in the introduction, is the question how we can describe and conceptualize the public realm and experiences of publicness today, including those experiences of hybridity that are common in a digitalized life world. To tackle this, I aim to develop a phenomenology of the public realm and publicness, and I do this also by revisiting the phenomenological tradition. For this, Schutz might just be the right person to turn to. Yet, is the public realm, however we might understand it, a finite province of meaning in the Schutzian sense? To give you a very short answer, I do not think so. And this is not what I'm going to argue for in this talk if the headline might have caused this misunderstanding. I do believe that the public realm is embedded in the paramount reality of the life world. What strikes me, however, in my reading of Schütz, and I'm curious to hear what the Schütz experts will say here. So what strikes me in my reading of Schütz is rather that he does not emphasize the public realm as a specific sphere, a province in the social world at all. What I aim to express with my title was therefore to retrieve something in Schütz's work, which at first sight and very astonishingly isn't there at all. Descriptions about there being something experientially and constitutionally specific about the public realm, about being, appearing, and acting in public. Descriptions of how a public realm of space is constituted, or of what it means to be in public or act as a public. Already these few words demonstrate how multifaceted the topic is. Let me therefore start with a short section that will give you an idea of the overall project and that allows me to clarify some basic concepts. Then I will turn to Schütz and look at three theses that relate to the question if there is a Schützian phenomenology of the public realm. This could have been an alternative title. Answer one will be, well, there isn't, because Schütz equates the term public with social and intersubjective. Answer two will be, there is, but only implicitly. One has to re-examine the concepts of social types and their scales of anonymity and use them to develop a description of the public realm and publicness. And answer three will be, there is, even explicitly, but in a rather restrained form in the theory of the well-informed citizen. I hear myself a little bit, so is this okay for you, or are you hearing? Okay, good. Yeah, that's what I mean. Is that better? Okay, good. Okay, you just give me the feedback and I put it back and forth and yeah. So this is what you're going to get. And I'm going to start right away with the overall topic and greater horizon, the concern with the phenomenology of the public realm. How to approach the topic. I would rather be following a descriptive approach here than a normative one. The public seems to be in crisis for at least 100 years now, if you look at the publications. And while I agree that commercialization, hate speech, fake news, and algorithmic manipulation have reached a new dimension in the digital age, I would like to take a step back today from the rhetoric of crisis, because I think there is still much we just need to describe and understand. In the plethora of disciplines working on the topic, the emerging overall picture can be quite confusing. Experientially non-transparent mechanisms such as data economy and AI technology are juxtaposed to a picture of users that are viewed in socio-psychological, behaviorist, sociologist, or pathological terms, while the whole field is also treated according to normative ideas about the public sphere as a fundamental pillar of our liberal democracies. But how does this all link up? I think that one possible way of understanding our situation better is still to anchor it in a plurality of life worlds. Not surprisingly, this is what I think a phenomenological approach can do. Without denying this is important, that there are highly important non-experiential factors that shape public contexts. A phenomenological approach would focus on the experiential public. In doing so, it limits its scope, but also insists that the public realm is nothing without people experiencing it. Public contexts are life worlds and spaces of meaning that are imbued with ideals that generate normative expectations, as well as continuing exclusions. The public realm is neither a natural entity, nor a Platonic idea, nor just an abstract communication or justification system, but a complex of intersubjective, spatiotemporal, medial, cultural, historical, political, technological, and its institutional phenomenon. It is a specific form of being together and sharing a world which comes in different pluralistic and intersecting layers. Being that, it offers types of meaning, integration, disintegration, sociality or anti-sociality that are to be described as possibilities in principle and as specific possibilities in our times. It is therefore crucial to regain and discover the public realm as an experiential space and as a space of meaning. Phenomenology should be able to methodically approach the topic of the experiential public realm in an exceptional way. After all, phenomenology is, according to its name, the investigation of appearances. Appearances appear to someone in a space of appearance and in a specific how of appearance, which includes mediation. Hence, experience, world, and appearance are terms that intrinsically belong together. Importantly, the ones who experience appearances are not Cartesian disembodied minds, but also appear in a world to others who reciprocally also manifest themselves by appearing. The receivers of appearances are thus rooted in a world of appearance. One could call this world essentially public. This constitutes a basic framework of a phenomenological approach to the public realm. Yet, to be public or in public also means to appear in a specific sense. In principle, as being accessible and perceivable by all. This happens in a world that offers different levels of publicness and different positions of accessibility shaped by cultural, historic, hegemonic, and technological factors. Experiencing publicness correlatively implies this basic visibility, exposedness, and accessibility, as well as further possibilities or impossibilities that build on it. Importantly, it also entails that these experiences can fail. So I see them on a scale of being able to succeed or fail and result in inaccessibility, intransparency, hypervisibility, superficiality, or other forms to be investigated. What will thus be in the focus for an investigation of the public realm will be how these features constitute a world for the experiencing subjects or fail to do so in different ways. And here, the question of reality plays an important role as well, but that would rather go into an Arendtian direction, I think, and this is why I didn't stress it so much here. So this is the big project. Without being able to further develop these questions here, let me at least try to preliminarily clarify one important matter. Which different dimensions do we imply with the word public? Think of public space, public life, public order, public opinion, the public sphere, the public or publics, the general public, public goods, public affairs, and public institutions. To which add the more abstract concepts of publicness and publicity. These are areas and aspects that are neither on the same conceptual level nor neatly separable from each other. And using them in the singular or in the plural makes a difference. In German, we have the word Öffentlichkeit, which seems to cover it all, but I think, philosophizing in different languages always has the advantage of showing you that this can be more problematic. And I think in English, it nicely shows those different levels we might cover up with that wonderful German term. Additionally, the meaning of public does not always run along the lines of the monolithic public-private dichotomy. Consider the oppositions of public versus communal in Plessner, public versus dispersed in Dewey, public versus intimate, Richard Sennett's work, public versus secret in Kant, public versus social or societal in Arendt, or public versus elitist, again, Dewey. As a phenomenologist, I'm interested to what extent these concepts also root in experiences and can be described in experiential terms. My suggestion is thus to conceive the term public in different experiential dimensions, either as a mode, a space, an order, or a social formation, and sometimes as a combination of these. Let's take the mode first. Publicity, and the terminology I use here is in a certain way contingent, but I just want to make a difference visible. And I use publicity for the Enlightenment concept and publicness for that, with the Heideggerian, the translation of Heideggerian Öffentlichkeit in English uses publicness. So publicity is a mode in which discourse, thought, and actions are conducted. It became favored in Enlightenment and implies visibility, openness, transparency, unrestricted access. In contrast, publicness is also a mode, one that implies a basic sharedness. This is not necessarily the same as publicity. Philosophers have spoken about the publicness of meanings, language, and practices. This was used as an argument against enclosed private minds or private languages, to allude to another famous philosopher from Vienna. This specific philosophical use of the public-private differentiation, I would say in Wittgensteinian spirit, has caused a lot of confusion because it mixes up inner-worldly spaces with an epistemological discourse on world access. Furthermore, publicness also seems to have its dark side, as Heidegger famously argued. The sharedness of meanings and practices can, even must, result in conformity of common practices. This can imply superficiality, idle talk, averageness, eventually obscurity. But I would like to take out the drama of this, as Heidegger introduces it. In its flattening as well as in its mobilizing ways, publicness implies a sharedness of the world in linguistic and practical terms. This sharedness, if it becomes more explicit, can also be extended to public things or goods, shared ownership, and public affairs, shared concern. Which means one can also take this into a Deweyan direction and not limit oneself to a Heideggerian criticism of mass society. The second meaning of public designates a space. This is a specifically erected, inner-worldly, and demarcated space. It can either take the open form of public space or more specifically assume the architectonics of a stage, a space of appearance, as Arendt called this. There are varieties of mediation that transcend the real spatiotemporal space of bodily appearance and create metaphoric spaces, which can be discursive, communicative, pictorial, virtual, and digital. In such spaces, arguments, opinions, personalities, images, principles can appear in medially preformed ways. They make up what we usually call the public sphere. So you see, I didn't use the term public sphere so far because I think this is very much related to the Habermasian concept and the whole legitimization that comes with it. This is why I prefer the term public realm, to hold it more open, to also include public space in it, for example. Finally, the fourth meaning, thirdly, the meaning of public implies an order and specific kinds of norms that also invade domestic private spaces containing, quote, Irving Goffman, the ground rules and the associated orderings of behavior that pertain to public life, as the sociologist Irving Goffman has shown. By working with the model of social order, Goffman can address social normativity on a very basic level, discerning, quote, acts that are approved and acts that are felt to be improper. Also, institutions are public in the sense of a normative order that pervades society. Finally, the fourth meaning of public concerns specific social formations. When Dewey, for example, speaks of a public, he has a community of those affected in their relation to their government in mind. Arendt speaks of the public in terms of judging spectators or actors. Richard Sennett, again, thinks about being and interacting with strangers, while Schütz's friend Aaron Gurwitsch just calls it being among another, untereinander sein. Again, we could think of different modes that would pertain to these social formations, from empowerment to exposedness. This only demonstrates how multifaceted an approach to questions of publicness and the public realm, which I use as an umbrella term, must be. Let me now turn to Schutz and the way he does or does not approach the topic. So, is there a Schutzian phenomenology of the public realm? And the first answer No, because public means intersubjective and social. Given that phenomenology is so predestined to investigate the public realm, as I've just argued, one must think that there are plenty of approaches to draw from in the phenomenological tradition. The opposite is the case, at least at first glance. Phenomenological investigations of the public realm, explicit phenomenological investigations of the public realm, are surprisingly rare. The big exception is Hannah Arendt's work, but astonishingly, Schütz makes no exception. Take the structures of the life world. In this book, containing meticulous analysis concerning the constitution of the social world, we surprisingly find no trace of the question how anything public is constituted. The word is hardly mentioned. Neither is the experiential difference between being in private or public addressed. Nor is the public sphere a topic in terms of a specific space of communication. Schütz and in continuation, Luckmann have not, as could have been very well the case, made these issues a part of the social arrangement of the life world of everyday existence. The question is, why is this so? And I've been trying to answer that to myself, and I'll be happy to hear what you think as well. So the first answer, one reason why the public does not become a topic could simply be that everything that is labeled as social and intersubjective is understood as being public. There are plenty of passages in the structures of the life world, as well as in the collected papers, to support this view, also in multiple realities. Given that we are dealing with the phenomenology of the social world, this might be regarded as a disappointing lack in differentiation, which ignores the fact that there are private and public spaces within the social world that make a difference in how we behave, which norms we follow, which systems of relevance are active, and last but not least, how we effectively inhabit these places. It seems, however, that Schütz is more interested in the epistemological point of view and also in the ontological one concerning the public-private differentiation. When using the public-private vocabulary, he mostly argues that the life world is certainly not my private world. I think we just had a very similar quote also from multiple realities here. It is an intersubjective world accessible to everyone. The life world, second quote, is not my private world, nor your private world, nor yours and mine added together, but rather the world of our common experience. So this is a typical philosopher's talk about public and private, right? This is what I call the philosophical public-private differentiation. Schütz meticulously shows how this common experience builds up. What he also insists on is that there are specific forms of privacy that even form finite provinces of meaning, such as dreaming. And I'd be happy to discuss this with you also later, since I had to cut this part out of my paper for the presentation. In any case, the first point to make is that Schütz is using the public-private differentiation rather in an epistemological sense, in a sense of access, even in an ontological sense, in the sense of durée, which is a very different kind of a being than the intersubjectively constituted world, which leads to considering everything social as essentially public, instead of conceiving the public realm as a specific space within a specific space of meaning within the social world. Although Schütz, similarly to Arendt, speaks of actors on the social scene, the scene seems to be everywhere. Come to the second point. Another explanation could be that Schütz indeed does pay very close attention to different strata within the social world, but that he articulates them more in terms of levels of anonymity. Here are some famous quotes from Structures of the Life World. My experience of the social world has a specific structure. The other is given to me immediately as a fellow man in the we relation, while the immediate experiences of the social world are graduated according to degrees of anonymity and are arranged in experiences of the contemporary world, the world of predecessors and the world of successors, end of quote. In short, Schütz shows how levels of sociality build up. On the basis, we directly perceive another person in the thou orientation and can develop a we orientation in reciprocal attention, which is typically a face-to-face situation. Besides this immediateness of the encounter with the face-to-face, most of our social relations are immediate, where we encounter others in terms of types. Schütz calls these relations they relations. While immediately encountered persons are my fellow men, Mitmensch, the contemporary, Zeitgenosse, is encountered as a social type in the everyday world, like, for example, the bus driver. Predecessors and successors are types with whom I cannot share my present or are not shared anymore. Space and time, closeness and distance, and formal structures of attainability and restorability are hence important for the constitution of different types of social relations. These factors stratify the social world into levels of anonymity and mediatedness. While living we relations are the closest form of social encounters in the form of living a life together, there are numerous other everyday situations where our conduct is simply based on the most anonymous social data, and the latter could just be what we call public encounters. For example, typifications and anonymizations that reach beyond the level of familiar you relations allow us to orient ourselves in a social situation where strangers meet, something that is essential for public life in the sense that Richard Sennett describes it. They provide quick and practical answers to the questions, who do I encounter, how, and in which setting? The public realm as a space of appearance certainly largely works with these anonymizations, even if this is not all there is to being appearing and acting in public. But what can be addressed as public order, including all kinds of micro, meso, and macro norms of behavior, could not get off the ground without these typifications. Types as well as roles are, of course, everywhere in the social world, also in private, even in intimate contexts. Being a mother, a wife, a lover, are social roles that deeply influence our identities and provide us with normative scripts. What makes a type a public type seems to be its more anonymous character, which will often be a functionary type, like the bus driver. While social relations in private can be characterized as being you relations, social relations in public are typically they relations. For example, if I want to buy something at the grocery store, a semi-public space, I will encounter the individual person working there as a functionary type, reducible to certain behavior. Schütz differentiates between types that are derived from the immediate experience of a fellow man, which are relatively rich in content and low in anonymization. So people like X, from types that build on behavior, which are more weakly individualized and grasp contemporaries only in reference to certain typical functions. So here we have this differentiation between functional type and personal type. Personal type is a person like X, functional type, the bus driver. Yet this only concerns individuals. Collectives can be typified as well, as they often are. In the case, so these are the cases that Schütz names, in the cases of the parliament, the soccer team, or the board of directors of the Rockefeller Foundation, the typification is based on functional and sometimes even personal types, a Maradona type or something like that. In terms of collectives, these examples are still relatively low in anonymization and rich in content. An example for a vague individual foundation and content serving as the basis, as Schütz says, for unclear fluctuating distinctions would be the enemies of our people. Finally, the anonymization can reach a degree where collectives are not based on individual types at all anymore. The state, the economy, the social classes are the example Schütz names. in light of the next section, one could also add the public or public opinion. Highly objective, highly anonymous objective meaning contexts and behavior contexts are grasped in these typifications, says Schütz. Schütz describes several issues here, I think, that are highly relevant for the description, the constitution, and possible experience of the public realm, even if he does not pay attention to this specific task. From a close circle of you and we relations, the public world unfolds in layers of typification and anonymization. One important feature Schütz points out to classify forms of anonymity is the possibility of conversion. And I think this is, I will soon explain why I think this is an important feature. So the possibility of conversion or mobility between relations and types. I think it is a good indicator for how explorable or alienating the public world can present itself. Certainly, certain they relations can easily be converted into you relations. I can get into a conversation with a person in the grocery store. The same is in principle possible with the board director of the Rockefeller Foundation. Also, the parliament can be converted into the immediate experience of fellow humans. And technological means help us with such a conversion, up to creating illusions of personal contact with politicians through personalized messages on my smartphone. All of this works as long as the type in question is built on individualized functionary types or personal types. It becomes more difficult to personally encounter the enemies of our people and impossible to get into a you relation with the globalized economy. So this is what Schütz says in the original here, when the typifications are like the state, the economy, the social classes, they are completely unamenable to conversion into the living reality of a fellow man. Or to be more precise, we can encounter representatives of this highly anonymous typification, but even if a personalized relation with them is possible, it has a vanishing point towards the unconvertible and unreachable. For a perfect literary description of such an alienating experience, think of Franz Kafka's novels, whose main characters are often in the following dilemma. They can, with many difficulties, encounter the official who handles their case, but they cannot encounter the law. Likewise, one cannot come face to face with the public sphere or public opinion. The remarkable shift here is that what is supposed to be public in the sense of enlightenment publicity, that is accessible and open, the institutions, changes its character into opaqueness, unavailability, and withdrawal from the perspective of the affected individual. What remains is a world of symbols which throw a bridge from one province of reality to the other. Just throwing this in with Kafka here. This distorted experience of publicness can be encountered in confrontation with bureaucracy, institutions, and social and technological structures that frame our existences, but only leave us with the feeling to surpass us. There is an important difference between experiencing a sort of publicness that allows for interaction, accessibility, and change, and experiencing a kind of publicness that remains anonymous, mute, and inaccessible. This has to do, as we can learn from Schütz, with the possibility to convert mere types into possibilities of real encounters and action, and to go back and forth between these two dimensions. The third way into a Schützian phenomenology of the public realm takes the most direct path via his 1946 paper, The Well-Informed Citizen. Framed as an essay on the social distribution of knowledge, it makes surprisingly normative statements in the very end about the public opinion, proclaiming that it would be, quote, the duty and the privilege of the well-informed citizen in a democratic society to make his private opinion prevail over the public opinion of the man on the street. End of quote. What sounds like an elitist rejection of mass democracy turns out to be a concerned analysis of a world in which no one has a full grasp of the complexity of interrelationships, and in which public opinion can therefore be easily manipulated. We get a politically orientated picture of the public realm here, so not just public space, public encounters, public life, which calls for citizens to exercise their capacity of judgment. At the same time, Schütz is aware of the complex social structures that emerge with increasing technological mediation and communication. This includes the challenges to obtain reliable and orientating knowledge. What is remarkable and slightly troubling about Schütz's portrayal of the situation, which in many ways echoes Dewey's Public and Its Problems, is that in contrast to the American pragmatist, Schütz somehow does not get through to action in this paper. The well-informed citizen remains a spectator who already struggles with the challenge to get an adequate picture of what really matters. But even if this is not a position of an empowering picture, I think it might get something quite right about how we experience public affairs today, as all the trends Schütz analyzes have only intensified. Again, Schütz does not explicitly address the public realm or the public sphere, let alone an intersubjective constitution of the public realm in this paper. In fact, his remarks about public opinion in the end come quite abrupt and without much of an explanation or contextualization. I will therefore highlight the elements which I think are indeed relevant for such a constitution. And in my analysis, I will partly point beyond Schütz and to the potential that these analytic tools could unfold for a phenomenology of the public realm. These elements are four, and I'm only going to talk about two. So a theory of relevance for the constitution of the public realm, since this is a room full with Schützians, I don't have to tell you very much about relevance, I think. So I'm going to cut that out. A theory of social types in terms of how one can deal with imposed structures of relevance. Then a theory of communicators of and in the public world, also that I have to throw out. And finally, a theory of socially approved opinion, opening up a normative stance regarding public opinion. So I cannot say much to the relevance structure. So here is just a very small comment. Relevance, of course, is a central topic in Schütz's phenomenology, which can be used for describing constitutional dynamics of the public realm, although Schütz himself did not do this, and we saw this in the talk today already. So I'm happy that other people have the same intuition. Relevant structures can be understood as fundamentally orientating structures in which we constantly pre-reflectively live and experience, and on the basis of which conscious beings inhabit a meaningful and contoured world. This involves motivational and attentional structures and a correlative meaning relief. Something is important, comes to the fore, stands out, and suddenly becomes a decisive key in a process of understanding, acting, or problem solving. Again, I think it's striking that neither Schütz nor Luckmann ever touched the idea, or please tell me that I've overlooked something, that the public sphere, public discourse could have a special function for creating, determining, shifting, or imposing relevance on a social level. This seems precisely what Dewey had in mind, as well as what Habermas expected of the clarifying powers of public discourse. But apart from the normative expectations that are definitely there in Habermas, I think the pure fact of the attention of the many, or probably all, makes a certain topic stand out. Furthermore, relevances that transcend my immediate relations and interests claim a gravity, claim a gravity that is often associated with public interest. To make something public or to appeal to the public precisely is a claim to relevance for all of us and not just for me or my friends. Hence, besides motivational relevance that is rooted in the subject and an objective relevance that imposes itself on me without me having to be interested first, there can of course be intersubjective relevance structures, that is all there, but they can result in constituting collective relevance publicly. So I would say this is a step that Schütz does not take in his analysis in this paper. This is probably also one of the reasons why the well-informed citizen seems to remain rather alone and powerless. Another one might be the focus on the social distribution of knowledge without further elaborating how this could relate to common action. Let me shortly sketch out the topic and aim of the paper. We live in a world, Schütz observes, when no one can understand anything fully anymore. The modern life world is a world that is compartmentalized in different stocks of knowledge that allow for specialization. Nobody has a coherent picture of this mix of systems of knowledge. Instead, it is radically socially distributed. This implies that we have divergent kinds of access to and attitudes towards it. At the same time, more and more social relevancies on a global scale have an unavoidable impact on us. Let's talk about tariffs, for example. The range of actions has dramatically increased. As Schütz writes in 1946, no spot of this globe is more distant from the place where we live than 60 airplane hours. Electric waves carry messages in a fraction of a second from one end of the earth to the other. And very soon, every place in this world will be the potential target of destructive weapons released at any other place. Although Schütz writes this long before the word globalization was invented, it is clear that imposed relevances become an increasingly pressing issue the more technologically and economically globalized the world becomes. Hence, the relevancies that we choose and those we have to put up with come in an imbalance. Here we also encounter the highly anonymous types again that are not convertible into a direct relation. We are less and less, as Schütz determined, in our social situation by relationship with individual partners within our immediate reach, and more by highly anonymous types which have no fixed place in the social cosmos. Nevertheless, they clearly determine our social reality. It's the last longer quote. Our own social surrounding is within the reach of everyone everywhere. An anonymous other whose goals are unknown to us because of his anonymity may bring us together with our systems of interest and relevances within his control. We are less and less masters in our own rights to define what is and what is not relevant to us. Politically, economically, and socially imposed relevances beyond our control have to be taken into account by us as they are. Therefore, we have to know them. End of quote. This is the rather grim situation which leads Schütz to reflect on the social distribution of knowledge as well as the different attitudes how to deal with imposed relevances. Schütz amplifies Dewey's diagnosis of the great society where the public, this is Dewey, where the public is in eclipse and remote from government, because mass society and the machine age have made former community affairs an unmanageably complex matter. But what Schütz is mainly interested in is how this contemporary world is given, how it can come into sight. I will therefore interpret the three different kinds of attitudes as three versions of how the world is constituted. My thesis is that only the well-informed citizen actually constitutes or aims at constituting a public world, while the two other types, the man on the street and the expert, remain enclosed in their respective private or restricted worlds. Since it is clearly typified first-person perspectives from which the world comes into sight, Schütz can be read as proposing ways in which the public realm is or is not experienced and how it builds up in our experience in terms of social knowledge. Schütz conceptualizes these first-person perspectives in the form of the mentioned idealized types, which have been mentioned today also: the expert, the man, a person on the street, and the well-informed citizen. As he reminds us, these are mere constructs and not real people, as each of us in daily life is simultaneously expert, well-informed citizen, and man on the street, but in each case with respect to different provinces of knowledge. The three types are explained and developed by what kind of knowledge they have, how their systems of relevance function, and how they relate to the difference between intrinsic and imposed relevances. The expert, by his decision to become an expert, chooses a certain frame of reference and thereby accepts, as Schütz says, the relevances imposed within his field as the intrinsic relevances of his acting and thinking. By choosing to be a virologist, a climate researcher, or a car engineer, I learn about specific objective relevances and relevance systems I assimilate as mine, that is, as my intrinsic relevances. As Schütz notes, this field is rigidly limited, as is the expert's knowledge, but therein it is clear and distinct and based on warranted assertions. The person on the street, who it has to be emphasized, who we all are to a certain extent, lives naively in their own and their in-group's intrinsic relevances. This implies that only practical purposes matter, and in terms of knowledge, only concrete recipes how to master a situation are of interest. In all matters which are not connected to such immediate concerns, the person on the street, quote, accepts her sentiments and passions as guides. Hence, she couldn't care less about imposed relevances, their origin and structure. She just takes them as given in a concrete situation. But why this is so and what might therefore be imposed on her tomorrow simply is not taken up in her system of relevances. I mean, if you just are kicked out of your apartment because you can't afford it anymore, maybe you don't want to reflect on the global economy market situation, right? You just want a new apartment. So these relevances thus remain as being given, they remain blindly imposed, while the focus remains on what can be practically dealt with. This is why in forming her opinions, she is, as Schütz says, much more governed by sentiment than by information, why she prefers, as statistics have amply shown, the comic pages of the newspaper to the foreign news, the radio quizzes to news commentators. Here Schütz, the concerned citizen and sociologist, shines through, who has a normative standpoint on how to adequately deal with the complex modern life world from the perspective of his sociology of knowledge. He also offers an explanation why this does not happen sufficiently. The person on the street is out of tune with the modern world. This world demands that apart from the practical relevances of our everydayness, we have to understand the workings of highly abstract social systems. Let us therefore turn to the well-informed citizen, who more correctly is the citizen who aims to be well-informed. She stands between the expert and the person on the street. She neither has nor aims to possess expert knowledge, yet again, the vagueness of mere recipe knowledge and the unclarified sentiments of the person on the street are not enough for her. Therefore, she aims to be well-informed, which means for her, quote, to arrive at a reasonably founded opinions in fields which, as she knows, are at least immediately of concern to her, although not bearing upon her purpose at hand. She's the newspaper reader who wants to obtain background information and who desires to build an opinion on the basis of these facts and analysis. With regard to relevant structures, the well-informed citizen finds herself placed in a domain which belongs to an infinite number of possible references. While the expert is at home in a system of imposed relevances, imposed, that is, by problems pre-established by the field, the well-informed citizen cannot look for shelter, says Schütz, in any pre-given framework. while trying to gather as much knowledge as possible about the relevances that can be imposed on her in the present and the future, she must also choose her frame of reference by choosing her interest. She thus crucially has to be a master of good judgment on top of being an information-seeking individual that can navigate the jungle of the socially mediated knowledge world well. This is the point where one would have to talk about the communicators in the public world, which is a huge topic and which I won't do. So the only thing I want to say is that the citizen who wants to be well informed today does not only have to tear herself away from the comic pages, she also has to remember that any form of information transmission is an enhanced and often invisible business model, even if it looks like an insider or an eyewitness talking privately to me on social media, for example. Finally, a public world in private eyes. Schütz ends his essay with a final distinction between socially derived knowledge and socially approved knowledge. While the former is acquired in different forms indicated above, so if you had the paper before you with the communicators, the latter makes the former gain extra weight. This happens by either being supported by authorities or by being shared by my whole in-group. The power of socially approved knowledge eventually creates what we take for granted, says Schütz. It creates the natural world we move in. As such, it is also the home of public opinion. This term, which appears very late in the paper, already has a troubled history when Schütz employs it. Once regarded as legitimizing authority in the French or American revolutions, it was now seen as easily manipulable, superficial mass opinion that was even harmful to the community. The classic text to be mentioned here is Walter Lippmann's Public Opinion from 1922 and the follow-up publication, The Phantom Public from 1925, to which Dewey responded with The Public and Its Problems in 1927. Lippmann eloquently argues how manufacturing consent is necessary in a complex world where people lack the ability to digest all necessary information correctly. He supports this thesis, and this I find really interesting, with a psychological theory of cognition that is strikingly similar to current neuroscientific theories. The claim here is that processing information results in a sort of pseudo environment, which is only a simplified mental image, as Lippmann writes, or in today's words, an abridged hallucination of reality, as you can hear it in the writings of Anil Seth or Thomas Metzinger. So this is, I would say, in neuroscientific research, this is very much the same kind of theory of cognition as we have. So not on the same scientific level, but you could reach the same conclusions as Lippmann does 100 years ago. Opinions are hence not formed by responsible citizens, but by the mass media that filters information and paints pictures and stories that can be digested. In order to protect democracy, Lippmann argues for an elite of experts and gatekeepers, a concept he invented, who must fabricate public opinion by counting on communication in codes and stereotypes rather than on education and critical discourse. You can see how Dewey wanted to respond to that. Another person I want to introduce here is Edward Bernays, the founder of the discipline of public relations, which he originally called propaganda. And he even goes a step further. Deeply influenced by Lippmann and some psychoanalytic ideas by his uncle, Sigmund Freud, Bernays reduces public opinion to engineering consent, which for him means quite bluntly, quote, conscious and intelligent manipulation of the masses without their knowledge. Not without cynicism, he calls this, quote, an important element in democratic society, and generates the idea of an invisible government manipulating public opinion with unseen mechanisms and thereby being, quote, the true ruling power of the country. This is from 1928. For Schütz, This is the reason why public opinion has nothing to do with the public world that opens up for the well-informed citizen. Public opinion is nothing else, he says, than the socially approved opinion of the person on the street. In this way, it imposes itself as relevant upon the better informed members of the community. But who actually approves it as such? Without being explicit, Schütz seems to hint at an interplay between experts gauging the opinion of the man on the street with, quote, polls, opinion polls, and questionnaires, the media communicating it, and politicians reacting to it. We encounter a certain system of fabrication of public opinion. This diagnosis has been updated by Harald Rau for the age of online communication. Rau confirms Schütz's analysis and further explains that the spiral of trivialization eventually boils down to purely economic necessity caused by the commercialization of media. The well-informed citizen thereby becomes a species that must be threatened with extinction. Quote, Rau, commercialization forces members of society into the role of a non-elite whose knowledge must remain limited. Not surprisingly, we find ourselves with the story of a decline of the public sphere, which used to consist of rightly socially approved experts and well-informed citizens, and which is now degraded to the aspect of the narrow-minded, easily entertained, and self-centered person on the street, which we all are in a certain respect. This diagnosis reminds of Habermas and fits well into the background of Dewey and his adversaries Lippmann and Bernays as well. I would like to end on a different note, however. The shift from an expert and well-informed normality to an averageness that loses its normative power of public reason can also be interpreted as a loss of a public world. As I've tried to argue, Schütz shows how three different kinds of attitudes constitute different kinds of world. The world of the person on the street, as well as the world of the expert, have somehow restricting, privatizing moments by virtue of their relevance structures. If relevant structures are either restricted to one's own inclinations, the comic pages, or needs, an affordable place to live, or to a pre-given frame of reference, virology, car engineering, they remain closed and blind in different kinds of ways. While the person on the street perspective does not get anything in view beyond her and her immediate and group's practical concerns of the here and now, the expert has deep and valuable knowledge, but remains too one-sided. The publicness of this expert world remains academic and does not get civic or political. It is restricted to discussing with peers, the only ones who the expert can take seriously. Other voices and issues lose salience. Schütz is taking side with Dewey here and insists that the field of common affairs cannot be left to experts alone. They are needed as authorities in public communication and discourse, but the perspective of the well-informed citizen is even more important, as our world remains fundamentally open to different kinds of concerns, which eventually must be weighed by judgment and cannot be decided by expert knowledge. Why, however, does Schütz call the opinion of the well-informed citizen a private opinion? Here are some tries and to answer that. One suggestion could be that this terminologically opposes it to public opinion, which he rejects. Another hint could be that also Habermas, 15 years later, will emphasize that private men and not public officials come together to deliberate on public issues and thereby question the legitimacy of the monarch's decisions. Although Schütz does not explicitly address questions of legitimization of power, as Habermas does, he thereby implicitly questions a different kind of king, public opinion, from the viewpoint of the citizen. A third explanation refers to a structural element. Whatever world comes into sight, it appears to a perspective. In terms of judgment, in a frame of reference, this perspective does more than just see a world, it articulates itself as a specific standpoint. While public opinion remains always vague and floating and ultimately anonymous typification, which can never really be encountered, the well-informed citizen is an identifiable private person with whom I can come into a discussion. Finally, however, it might also indicate the limits of the whole concept. While the specialist remains enclosed in her world, and the person on the street limits the appearance of the world to only private interest and respective practical relevance, the well-informed citizen remains a powerless spectator. The world that opens up to her is one where life-worldly complexity can appear in a specific private perspective, but what does not open up is a public realm of communication, deliberation, and political concerted action, at least not in this paper. Thank you very much for your attention.
Hello, hello.
Okay, because of the limits of the schedule, we have 2 or 3 questions that we can take. And would you please field the questions? Great.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sophie. I really liked how you deconstructed Schütz, and I think that was very informative. I have some comments regarding the well-informed citizen. And of course, as you said, this sociology knowledge perspective is very interesting. Of course, to be a well-informed citizen today is very demanding on the one hand side. It's not something that is easy. That's just the first part of it. And the other part of being a well-informed citizen is taking part in the public life. It's not just to sit on the plaza, hanging out, being there, reading a newspaper. But you also touched upon this, but you didn't really develop it, that you actually have to make action happening, making a change. That you, as a bürger, you are responsible. And you, of course, you will be responsible for your actions, and they will be seen in public. So I wonder, would that be a way to use Schützian approach to understand why it is so difficult and perhaps why there still is a crisis of the public, as it were?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, a very short answer. It's just not in this paper. I think it just doesn't say it, right? I mean, we can draw it from maybe other writings, but in this analysis, it's just this very last ominous sentence here. But then we would really like to know, okay, but what are we supposed to do now? Now, should we get together? Is it the model that Habermas then invokes from the classical Enlightenment discussions, or is it something else? And that remains completely unclear. And I just wanted to underline that I find that interesting from someone who has a full theory of action, right? So it is all there. This is what kind of fascinates me, or makes me, or irritates me also, that all of this is there and it doesn't use it for these questions. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Professor. On the same topic, but isn't this the problem of phenomenology at large? Because the problem of phenomenology is that it started and began as a descriptive endeavor. So finding specifically how to act, what to act for, requires something. Doesn't it require something that is beyond phenomenology? Because the problem is, and Schutz can help us in this sense because his theory of action is more developed than others. But in the end, somehow I always have the impression that at some point we have to decide, and the decision is never entirely reducible to something describable rationally. I always have this impression. Having attended also your seminar online on critical phenomenology, I always have this question in mind.
Yeah, thank you. So I would not say that this is a problem of phenomenology in general, because phenomenologies tend to be very different here. So I would be very unhappy if phenomenology were just described as a descriptive project. If you look at Husserl, it's full of normative ideas. And we heard that in the talk today as well. So, and Husserl has a whole idea what he wants to act for in a community of love or whatever. So, and I mean, Heidegger, if you like it or not, also has his political ideas too, and you have to, you can gain out some normative positions there as well. And I think in Hannah Arendt, it's very clear how she comes to action. What phenomenology does, well, no, it's difficult to say because there's a whole, there's this whole tradition of value theory, but then there are existentialists who have freedom as their measurement of action. So my short answer is, as a diagnosis for phenomenology, I could not underwrite this or could not sign this kind of claim. In the case of Schütz, it is probably truer. Yeah. So I guess this might be the point where Schütz, and this I find an interesting tone in this paper coming through, that he somehow, I mean, if in the end he sort of complains about what has happened to public opinion or socially approved opinion, is a sort of idea that before that something like public reasonable dialogue could happen. So there is a kind of very slight normative idea in the back, which only this can allow him to criticize public opinion in the state as it is now. So, but it is only there very implicitly. Thank you.
And we have a few quick announcements at the end.